I hadn't heard my son's voice in 2 weeks. No calls. No texts. Just silence. And when you're a mother, silence is the loudest scream you'll ever hear. So I got in my car. I didn't tell anyone. I just drove. 40 minutes through rain that felt like the sky was crying for me. My hands shook on the steering wheel. Something was wrong. A mother knows. A mother always knows. When I pulled up to his house, all the lights were off. It was 3 in the afternoon. The curtains were drawn. The mailbox was overflowing. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. Still nothing. I tried the door. Locked. I went around back, my shoes sinking into mud, and tried the back door. It opened. The hinges screamed like they were warning me to turn around. But I couldn't. I was already inside. The smell hit me first. Not death, thank God, but neglect. Rotting food. Dirty dishes stacked everywhere. The living room looked like a hurricane had torn through it. Furniture overturned. Picture frames smashed on the floor. And there, in the corner, was my grandson's teddy bear. The one I'd given him when he was born. Torn in half. I called out. Daniel? Matthew? My voice echoed through the empty house. No answer. I walked down the hallway, past family photos that now felt like they belonged to strangers. The bathroom door was open. Water had been left running in the sink, dripping endlessly into a basin full of rust-colored stains. Then I heard it. A sound so faint I almost missed it. Coming from Matthew's room. My 4-year-old. I bent down and looked under the bed. And what I saw made my blood turn to ice. It was Matthew. My grandson. But he didn't look like my grandson anymore. His face was hollow. His eyes were sunken and dark. His lips were cracked and bleeding. He was wearing the same Superman pajamas I'd seen him in 2 weeks ago, but they were filthy, stained with things I couldn't identify. He was curled into a ball, shaking. Matthew, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's Grandma. It's okay. You're safe now. He didn't move. He just stared at me with eyes that had seen too much. Eyes that didn't belong on a 4-year-old child. Where's your daddy? I asked softly. Where's Mommy? His little mouth opened. His voice came out like broken glass. Daddy said, stay here. Daddy said, don't come out. Daddy said, the bad lady will hurt me. The bad lady. My stomach dropped. I reached under the bed and very gently took his hand. He flinched but didn't pull away. Come here, baby. Come to Grandma. He crawled out slowly, and when I saw his whole body, I wanted to scream. He was skin and bones. His arms were covered in bruises. There were marks around his wrists. Red, angry marks that looked like rope burns. I pulled him into my arms, and he felt like a ghost. Like he weighed nothing at all. He buried his face in my shoulder and started sobbing. Not the loud, dramatic crying of a child throwing a tantrum. No. This was the silent, shuddering cry of someone who'd learned that making noise was dangerous. I'm so hungry, he whispered against my neck. Grandma, I'm so hungry. I carried him out of that room, out of that house, straight to my car. I didn't care about finding Daniel anymore. I didn't care about answers. I just needed to get this child to safety. I strapped him in the backseat, gave him the granola bar I always kept in my purse, and watched him devour it like a starving animal. Then I called 911. My voice was shaking so badly the operator had to ask me to repeat myself 3 times. But I managed to tell her everything. The address. The condition of the house. The condition of my grandson. She told me to stay on the line. She told me police and paramedics were on the way. I turned around to look at Matthew in the back seat. He was staring at me with those hollow eyes, crumbs on his chin. Grandma, he said quietly. Are you the bad lady? My heart shattered into a million pieces. No, baby. No, I'm not. Who told you about a bad lady? Daddy did. He said if the bad lady comes, I have to hide. He said the bad lady wants to take me away forever. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. But I kept my voice calm. Your daddy was confused, sweetheart. There's no bad lady. You're safe now. The police arrived within 7 minutes. Paramedics checked Matthew right there in my car. Dehydration. Malnutrition. Signs of physical abuse and neglect. They wanted to take him to the hospital immediately. I rode in the ambulance with him, holding his tiny hand, whispering that everything would be okay even though I had no idea if that was true. At the hospital, they admitted him right away. For fluids. Blood tests. X-rays. A pediatrician examined him while I sat in the corner, numb, trying to process what had happened. Trying to understand how my son could do this to his own child. A police detective came to speak with me. Her name was Detective Morrison. She had kind eyes, but her questions were sharp. Where was my son? Where was my daughter-in-law? How long had it been since I'd seen them? Did I know if they were using drugs? Had there been any signs of domestic violence? I answered everything honestly. Daniel had always been a good kid. He'd married young, maybe too young, to a woman named Vanessa. I'd never particularly liked her. There was something cold about her. Something calculating. But I'd kept my mouth shut because he seemed happy. About 6 months ago, things started changing. Daniel stopped calling as much. When he did call, he sounded stressed. Distracted. Vanessa stopped coming to family dinners. The last time I'd seen Matthew, he'd been quiet. Too quiet. He'd clung to me when it was time to leave, and I'd brushed it off as a phase. God, I'd brushed it off. What kind of grandmother does that? Detective Morrison wrote everything down. Then she told me something that made my blood run cold. We executed a search warrant on the house. We found evidence of drug use. Methamphetamine. Paraphernalia. And Mrs. Carter, we found something else. In the master bedroom. Would you be willing to come to the station and identify some items? I said yes. What else could I say? I left Matthew with the nurses, promising I'd be back soon, and followed Detective Morrison to the police station. They took me to a small room with fluorescent lights that hummed like angry insects. On the table were plastic evidence bags. Detective Morrison put on gloves and started showing them to me one by one. A wallet. Daniel's. Credit cards maxed out. Driver's license with his face, but he looked different. Gaunt. Wild-eyed. A purse. Vanessa's. Inside were more credit cards, prescription bottles with other people's names on them, and a notebook. Detective Morrison opened the notebook and showed me the pages. Lists. Names. Amounts of money. Dates. Does this mean anything to you? She asked. Behind where Matthew was hiding. Do you want to see it? No. I didn't want to see it. But I nodded anyway. She pulled out another evidence bag. Inside was a phone. Cracked screen. Covered in something dark. We believe this belonged to your daughter-in-law. We're trying to access it now. But we were able to see some text messages on the lock screen. Messages between her and someone whose contact name is just they're disturbing. She showed me the screen. I had to squint to read the small text through the cracked glass. When? Vanessa, soon. He's getting suspicious. What about the kid? Vanessa, what about him? Can't take him with us. Vanessa, leave him. Someone will find him eventually. I couldn't breathe. The room started spinning. She was going to leave him, I whispered. She was going to leave my grandson to die in that house. Detective Morrison's jaw tightened. We believe so, yes. Mrs. Carter, we need to find your son and daughter-in-law. Do you have any idea where they might have gone? Family? Friends? Vacation homes? I tried to think through the fog in my brain. Daniel's father had passed away 10 years ago. I was his only family. Vanessa's family lived in Florida, but she'd been estranged from them for years. Friends? I couldn't remember the last time Daniel had mentioned friends. There's a cabin, I said suddenly. About 2 hours north. Daniel inherited it from his uncle. He used to take Matthew there for fishing trips. I haven't heard him talk about it in over a year, but maybe. Detective Morrison wrote down the address. We'll send units there immediately. Mrs. Carter, I need you to go back to the hospital with Matthew. Stay with him. Don't let him out of your sight. If your son or daughter-in-law try to contact you, call me immediately. Don't engage with them. Don't tell them where Matthew is. Do you understand? I understood. I understood that my son had become someone I didn't recognize. I understood that my grandson had been living in hell while I'd been going about my normal life, worried about trivial things like grocery shopping and book club meetings. I went back to the hospital. Matthew was asleep, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily, reassuringly. I sat beside his bed and held his hand. His tiny, fragile hand. And I made a promise. I promised him that he would never be hurt again. That I would protect him no matter what. 3 hours later, my phone rang. Detective Morrison. We found them, she said. Her voice was tight. At the cabin. Both of them. Mrs. Carter, you should sit down. I was already sitting. Are they in custody? Your son is. Your daughter-in-law is dead. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? How? It appears to be an overdose. We found her in the bedroom with a needle still in her arm. Your son was in the living room, semi-conscious. He's being treated now, and once he's stable, he'll be taken into custody. Dead. Vanessa was dead. And Daniel, my Daniel. Detective, what happens now? I asked. My voice sounded hollow. Your son will be charged with child endangerment and neglect at minimum. Depending on what we find in our investigation, there may be additional charges. Mrs. Carter, I have to ask. Did you ever suspect He'd cried when his goldfish died. He'd volunteered at animal shelters in high school. He'd wanted to be a teacher. Where had that Daniel gone? No, I said. I didn't. Over the next few days, the full story emerged. Piece by piece. Like a nightmare coming into focus. Vanessa had started using drugs 2 years ago. Prescription pills at first, then harder stuff. She'd gotten Daniel involved. He'd lost his job. They'd burned through their savings. The house was in foreclosure. They'd been hiding it from everyone, putting on a normal face while their lives fell apart behind closed doors. The text messages on Vanessa's phone revealed everything. She'd been planning to leave Daniel. She'd been having an affair with someone named Robert, a dealer who supplied her with drugs. They were going to run off together, start fresh somewhere new. And Matthew? Matthew was just an inconvenience. A burden they didn't want to carry. Daniel had known. He'd known about the affair. He'd known about their plans to abandon Matthew. And instead of doing something, instead of protecting his son, he'd hidden him under the bed and told him to stay there. To hide from the bad lady. The bad lady was me. Daniel had been so paranoid, so deep in his addiction, that he'd convinced himself I was the enemy. That I would take Matthew away. So he'd hidden his son like a shameful secret and told him not to come out. Even for food. Even for water. Matthew had been under that bed for 3 days. 3 days without food. Minimal water from a bottle Daniel had left him. 3 days lying in his own waste because he was too afraid to come out. Too afraid of the bad lady. The doctors said another day and he might have died. Kidney failure. Organ damage. His little body was already shutting down when I found him. Daniel was arrested. He pleaded not guilty. His lawyer tried to argue that he was a victim too, that Vanessa had manipulated him, that the drugs had clouded his judgment. But the evidence was overwhelming. The text messages. The condition of the house. Matthew's medical records. The testimony of neighbors who'd heard crying but hadn't called anyone because they didn't want to get involved. I visited Daniel once in jail. I needed to look him in the eyes. I needed to understand how the child I'd raised could do this to his own child. He looked terrible. Hollow. Empty. Like a shell of the person he used to be. When they brought him into the visiting room, he couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he said. His voice cracked. "Mom, I'm sorry. Sorry." He was sorry. Like that word could undo anything. Like that word could erase the image of Matthew's terrified face under that bed. "Why?" I asked. My voice was cold. I didn't recognize it. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you ask for help? He started crying. I was scared. I was so scared. Vanessa said if anyone found out, they'd take Matthew away. She said we'd go to jail. She said we just needed a little more time to get clean, to figure things out. So you hid him under a bed and let him starve? I didn't mean I thought I was going to come back. You left him there for 3 days, Daniel. 3 days. He was dying. His face crumpled. I know. I know. God, Mom, I know. I hate myself. I wish I was dead. I wish Vanessa and I had both. Don't. I stood up. My hands were shaking. Don't you dare say that. You don't get to play the victim here. You don't get to feel sorry for yourself. You did this. You chose drugs over your son. You chose a woman who didn't care if he lived or died over your own child. Mom, please, I came here to tell you that Matthew is alive. He's safe. He's with me now. And you will never see him again. Do you understand? Never. He sobbed. I'm his father. No. I leaned close to the glass that separated us. You're nothing. You're the man who tried to kill him. And I will spend every remaining day of my life making sure he never has to see your face again. I walked out. I didn't look back. And I haven't spoken to him since. The trial lasted 3 months. I sat in that courtroom every single day, listening to the prosecutors lay out what had happened. Listening to experts testify about Matthew's injuries, his trauma, the long-term psychological damage he'd suffered. Listening to Daniel's lawyer try to paint him as a sympathetic figure led astray by an evil woman. But I also listened to Matthew's therapist testify. About the nightmares. About how he still couldn't sleep without a light on. About how he hoarded food in his room because he was terrified he wouldn't be fed. About how he flinched whenever someone raised their voice. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They found Daniel guilty on all counts. Child endangerment. Child neglect. Child abuse. The judge sentenced him to 15 years in prison. 15 years. It didn't feel like enough. It would never be enough. But it was over. Finally over. Matthew came to live with me permanently. I sold my small house and bought a bigger one with a yard where he could play. I enrolled him in therapy. I got him into a good preschool. I spent every day trying to undo the damage his parents had done. It wasn't easy. He had night terrors. He wet the bed. He couldn't stand being in small spaces. He panicked if I left the room for too long. But slowly, so slowly, he started to heal. He started smiling again. Real smiles. He started playing. He started acting like a 4-year-old instead of a traumatized soldier. 6 months after I found him, he said something that made me cry. We were eating breakfast, and he looked up at me with his big brown eyes and said, "Grandma, I'm not scared anymore." I hugged him. I held him tight. "Good," I whispered. "You never have to be scared again." But here's the thing about this story. Here's the part that kept me up at night. The part that made me question everything. A year after Vanessa's death, after Daniel was in prison and Matthew was starting to thrive, I got a phone call. From Detective Morrison. "Mrs. Carter," she said. "I need to talk to you about Vanessa's autopsy report." My heart sank. What about it? The toxicology came back. It showed high levels of fentanyl in her system. Consistent with an overdose. But there was something else. Something we missed initially. What? Bruising. On her arms. Defensive wounds on her hands. And trace amounts of your son's DNA under her fingernails. I felt cold. What does that mean? Mrs. Carter, we don't believe Vanessa's death was an accidental overdose. We believe your son killed her. The world tilted. What? We've reopened the investigation. We're looking at whether this was premeditated or heat of the moment. But the evidence suggests he held her down and injected her with a lethal dose. She fought back. He was stronger. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. There's more, Detective Morrison continued. We found a journal. Hidden in the cabin. It belonged to your son. Mrs. Carter, he'd been planning this. For weeks. He knew about her affair. He knew she wanted to leave him. And he wrote about how he couldn't let her go. How she deserved to die for what she'd done. My son was a murderer. Not just a neglectful father. Not just an addict. A murderer. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because there's going to be another trial. And because I think you deserve to know the truth. Your son didn't just hurt Matthew. He took a life. Regardless of what kind of person Vanessa was, he had no right to do what he did. She was right. Of course she was right. But part of me, a small, dark part of me that I'm ashamed to admit exists, part of me wasn't sorry Vanessa was dead. She'd been willing to let Matthew die. She'd called him an inconvenience. She'd planned to run off and leave him to rot in that house. Did she deserve to die for that? Maybe not. But did I mourn her? No. I didn't. The second trial was harder than the first. This time, I didn't attend. I couldn't. I couldn't look at Daniel and see a murderer. I couldn't reconcile the sweet boy I'd raised with the man who'd killed his wife and abandoned his son. He was convicted. Another 15 years added to his sentence. 30 years total. He'd be an old man when he got out. If he got out. Matthew doesn't know. He thinks his mother died from drugs. He thinks his father is in jail because he made bad choices. When he's older, I'll tell him the truth. But not yet. He's been through enough. Now we're building a new life. Matthew starts kindergarten next fall. He's excited. He's made friends. He's thriving. Every night before bed, I read him stories. His favorite is about a little boy who goes on adventures with his grandmother. He always falls asleep before the end, and I sit there watching him breathe, grateful for every peaceful moment. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and Matthew is sleeping soundly in his room, I think about that day. The day I opened his bedroom door and saw those small fingers gripping the carpet. The day I looked under the bed and saw my grandson's hollow, terrified eyes staring back at me. And I think about how close I came to losing him. If I'd waited one more day. If I'd convinced myself Daniel was just busy. If I'd ignored that mother's instinct that something was wrong. I think about all the children who aren't as lucky. All the Matthews who are hiding right now, terrified, waiting for someone to find them. And I wonder how many people ignore the signs because they don't want to get involved. Because they don't want to believe the worst. Because it's easier to look away. But here's what I learned. Here's what I need you to understand. Evil doesn't always look like a monster. Sometimes it looks like your own child. Sometimes it wears a familiar face. And the most dangerous thing you can do is assume it could never happen in your family. Because it can. It did. I saved Matthew that day. But I didn't save him from strangers or some random evil. I saved him from his own parents. From the people who were supposed to love and protect him more than anyone else in the world. And that's a special kind of horror. The kind that doesn't go away. The kind that changes you forever. So when people ask me how I'm doing, I smile and say we're fine. We're healing. We're moving forward. And that's true. But what I don't say is that I'm haunted. Every single day. By what I found under that bed. By what almost happened. By what did happen. But I also don't say that I'm grateful. Grateful I listened to my instincts. Grateful I went to that house. Grateful I got down on my knees and looked under that bed instead of walking away. Because if I hadn't, Matthew wouldn't be here. He wouldn't be laughing. He wouldn't be playing. He wouldn't be sleeping peacefully in his room down the hall, safe and loved and warm. 2 years have passed since that day. Matthew is 6 now. He still has nightmares sometimes, but they're getting fewer and farther between. He's started calling me Mom instead of Grandma. It broke my heart the first time, but it also filled it back up in a way I didn't know was possible. Last week, he drew a picture at school. The teacher sent it home with a note saying it was part of their My Family unit. The picture showed 2 people, a tall figure with grey hair labeled Mom and a smaller figure with brown hair labeled me. We were holding hands. There was a big yellow sun in the corner and a house with flowers all around it. No one else. Just us. And you know what? That's okay. That's perfect. But the story doesn't end there. Because 6 months ago, I got another call. This time it wasn't from Detective Morrison. It was from a woman named Sarah. She said she'd read about our case in the news. She said she worked for an organization that helped children who'd been rescued from abuse and neglect. She asked if I'd be willing to speak at an event they were hosting. I said no at first. I didn't want to relive it. I didn't want to talk about the worst day of my life in front of strangers. But she said something that changed my mind. Mrs. Carter, there's a grandmother in our program right now. She suspects her grandson is being abused, but she's afraid to do anything. She's afraid of being wrong. She's afraid of causing problems. She needs to hear from someone who's been there. Someone who acted. Someone who saved a child. So I went. I stood in front of 30 people and told them everything. The silence. The drive to the house. The smell. The moment I saw those fingers under the bed. The look in Matthew's eyes. Every painful detail. When I finished, that grandmother came up to me. She was crying. She grabbed my hands and said, "Thank you. I needed to hear this. I'm going to that house today. Right now. I'm going to check on my grandson." She did. And she found him locked in a closet. He'd been there for 12 hours. His parents were passed out from drugs. If she'd waited, if she'd kept doubting herself, he might not have survived. She saved him because I told my story. Because I shared the worst thing that ever happened to me. And that's when I realized something. This nightmare, this horror story that was my life for those dark months, it had a purpose. It could help other people. It could save other children. So I kept speaking. At schools. At hospitals. At police stations. Anywhere they'd have me. I told Matthew's story, our story, over and over again. And every time, someone would come up to me afterward. A teacher who noticed a student with suspicious bruises. A neighbor who'd been hearing crying through the walls. A family member who'd been worried but afraid to act. And they'd tell me they were going to do something now. They were going to call. They were going to check. They were going to save that child. In the past 2 years, I've spoken at over 50 events. I've trained hundreds of people to recognize the signs of child abuse. I've helped create protocols for welfare checks. I've lobbied for better funding for child protective services. And I've heard from 19 families who found children because of my story. 19 children who are alive and safe because I was willing to stand up and talk about the worst day of my life. 19 Matthews who got their chance to heal. But here's what nobody tells you about becoming an advocate. Here's what they don't warn you about. Every time you tell the story, you relive it. Every time you describe finding your grandson under that bed, you see his face again. Those hollow eyes. Those rope burns on his wrists. The way he flinched when you touched him. It never gets easier. Every telling rips the wound open again. But I do it anyway. Because those 19 children are worth my pain. Because there are more children out there right now, hiding, suffering, praying for someone to find them. Last month, I got a letter. It was from a 16-year-old girl named Emma. She wrote, "Dear Mrs. Carter, you spoke at my school 3 years ago when I was in 8th grade. I've never forgotten your story. Last week, my friend told me her little brother was being hurt by their stepdad. She made me promise not to tell anyone. But I remembered what you said. You said silence protects abusers. You said speaking up saves lives. So I told my guidance counselor. They investigated. The little boy is safe now. He's living with his grandmother. My friend won't talk to me anymore. She says I betrayed her. But I keep thinking about your grandson and how he's okay now because you did something. I hope I did the right thing. I hope someday my friend will understand. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak." I cried when I read that letter. I cried because Emma was right, she'd done exactly the right thing. And I cried because I know how hard it is to choose between loyalty and safety. Between keeping a secret and saving a life. I wrote her back. I told her she was a hero. I told her that her friend might be angry now, but someday, when that little boy is grown and happy and safe, she'll understand. She'll know that Emma saved her brother's life. Matthew found the letter on my desk. He's learning to read now, and he asked me what it said. So I read it to him, simplified a bit for his 6-year-old brain. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Mom, is that what you did for me? You saved me like Emma saved that boy?" I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. He climbed into my lap, even though he's getting too big for that now. "I'm glad you found me," he whispered. "I'm glad I don't have to hide anymore." "Me too, baby. Me too." He pulled back and looked at me with those big brown eyes that aren't hollow anymore, eyes that shine with life and hope and joy. "When I grow up, I want to help kids like Emma did. I want to save people." And in that moment, I knew. I knew that everything we'd been through, all the pain, all the trauma, all the nightmares, it wasn't for nothing. It was creating something beautiful. Something powerful. It was turning my Matthew into someone who would protect other children. Someone who would speak up. Someone who would never, ever look away when someone needed help. That's the real twist. The one nobody expected. The horror story became a hero's story. The nightmare became a mission. The worst thing that ever happened to us became the thing that defined us, not as victims, but as survivors who refused to let other children suffer the way Matthew suffered. Daniel writes to me sometimes from prison. I don't read the letters. I throw them away. But the last one I glanced at before tossing it, I saw one line: "I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope Matthew is happy." And you know what? He is. Matthew is so happy it makes me ache with gratitude every single day. He's happy in a way he never could have been if I hadn't found him. If I hadn't acted. If I hadn't trusted my instincts and gone to that house. Last week, we went to the park. Matthew was playing on the swings, pumping his legs hard, trying to go higher and higher. He was laughing, this pure, joyful sound that filled the whole playground. Another mother sat down next to me on the bench. She smiled and said, "Your son is adorable. You must be so proud." I didn't correct her. I just said, "I am. I really am. Because here's the truth, Matthew is my son now. Not because I gave birth to him, but because I saved him. Because I fought for him. Because I chose him over my own child when it mattered most." People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about testifying against Daniel. If I struggle with choosing my grandson over my son. And the answer is no. Not even for a second. Daniel stopped being my son the moment he hid Matthew under that bed and walked away. The moment he chose drugs and a woman who didn't care about his child. The moment he put his hands on Vanessa and injected her with poison. He made his choices. I made mine. And I'd make the same choice every single time. Tonight, after I tuck Matthew into bed, after I read him his story and kiss his forehead and watch him drift off to sleep, I'll go downstairs and prepare for tomorrow's speaking engagement. I'll rehearse the story one more time. I'll remind myself why I do this, why I keep ripping open the wound. And I'll think about that moment 2 years ago when I got down on my knees and looked under that bed. When I saw my grandson's terrified face staring back at me. When I made the choice to reach for him instead of walking away. That was the moment everything changed. Not just for Matthew. For both of us. That was the moment I became the person I was always supposed to be. The person who fights. The person who saves. The person who refuses to stay silent. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I don't know if that's true. But I know what almost killed Matthew made us both into something different. Something better. Something unbreakable. So here we are. 2 years later. Still healing. Still fighting. Still saving other children who are hiding under beds, in closets, in basements, waiting for someone to care enough to look. And we'll keep doing this. For as long as it takes. For as many children as we can reach. Because every single one of them deserves what Matthew has now: safety, love, peace, and the knowledge that they're worth saving. That night under the bed was the worst night of Matthew's life. But it was also the night his real life began. The night he was found. The night he was saved. The night everything changed. And that's what I tell people when I speak. I don't just tell them the horror story. I tell them the rest of it. The healing. The hope. The transformation from victim to survivor to advocate. Because that's the real ending. Not the trauma. Not the pain. But what comes after. What you build from the ashes. How you turn the worst thing that ever happened to you into the reason you keep living, keep fighting, keep saving others. Matthew is sleeping peacefully right now. No nightmares tonight. Just dreams of swings and sunshine and the life he's building. The life he deserves. The life I'll protect with everything I have until my last breath. And in the morning, when he wakes up, I'll be there. Like I am every morning. Like I'll be every morning for the rest of my life. Because that's what you do when you save someone. You don't just rescue them once. You keep saving them. Every single day. With every meal you make. Every nightmare you soothe. Every time you show up and prove that this time, it's different. This time, love isn't a trap. This time, safety is real. 3 months ago, something happened that I need to tell you about. Something that changed everything again. I was at the grocery store with Matthew. He was helping me pick out apples, carefully examining each one like I taught him. A woman approached us. She was probably in her 30s, thin, with dark circles under her eyes that I recognized immediately. The eyes of someone carrying too much weight. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Are you Margaret Carter?" I tensed. Matthew moved closer to me instinctively. "I am," I said carefully. "I heard you speak last year. At the community center." Her voice cracked. "You talked about finding your grandson. About how you knew something was wrong." I nodded. "I did." She looked around nervously, like she was afraid someone might hear. "I need to tell someone. I need to tell you. My sister, she has 2 kids. 8 and 5. I haven't seen them in months. She keeps making excuses. Says they're sick. Says they're busy. But I know. I know something's wrong. I can feel it." My heart started pounding. "Have you called anyone? I'm scared. What if I'm wrong? What if I ruin her life over nothing? What if she never speaks to me again?" Tears filled her eyes. "But what if you're right? What if those kids are, where does she live?" I interrupted. "She told me. An address 20 minutes away." I pulled out my phone and called Detective Morrison. Right there. In the produce section of the grocery store. I handed the phone to the woman, her name was Lisa, and made her give the detective every detail she could remember. Detective Morrison promised to send someone to do a welfare check immediately. Lisa was shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. When the call ended, she looked at me with terrified, hopeful eyes. "Did I just destroy my family?" she asked. "No," I said firmly. "You might have just saved it." I gave her my number. Told her to call me when she heard something. Matthew and I finished our shopping in silence. In the car, he asked, "Was that lady scared like you were when you found me?" "Yes, baby. Exactly like that." "Are her kids hiding under a bed too?" "I don't know. But we're going to make sure someone checks." Lisa called me 4 hours later. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "They found them," she gasped. "They found them. Oh God, you were right." I was right. The 8-year-old, his arm was broken. The 5-year-old was locked in a bathroom. There was no food in the house. No food. How could my sister? I talked her through it. The shock. The guilt. The horror of realizing someone you love is capable of something monstrous. I'd been there. I knew every stage of that nightmare. Her sister was arrested. The children were placed in emergency foster care. And Lisa became their guardian 3 weeks later. The last time she called me, she said, "They're eating again. They're playing." The little one smiled yesterday. Actually smiled. I didn't think I'd ever see that. 20 children. That makes 20 now. 20 children saved because I was willing to share the worst day of my life. But here's what I haven't told you yet. Here's the part that keeps me up at night, even now. Last year, I got a message on Facebook. From a woman I didn't know. Her profile picture was a sunset. No personal information. The message said, "You don't know me. But I know what really happened. I know what you found under that bed. And I know you didn't tell the whole story. My blood turned to ice. I stared at that message for 10 minutes before I could bring myself to reply. Who are you? The response came immediately. I was Vanessa's friend. Her real friend. Not the druggies. Not Robert. Me. I knew her before everything fell apart. I didn't want to engage. Every instinct told me to block this person and delete the message. But I couldn't. I had to know. What do you want? To tell you the truth. The truth the police don't know. The truth Daniel doesn't even know. I'm not interested in conspiracies or Matthew wasn't supposed to be there that day. I stopped breathing. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, shaking. What do you mean? I typed. Vanessa told me everything. A week before she died. She was scared. She said she'd made a terrible mistake. She said she and Robert were planning to leave, but Daniel found out. He went crazy. He threatened to kill her if she tried to take Matthew. He threatened to kill Matthew. So she made a deal with him. She'd leave Matthew with Daniel, and she'd go quietly. No custody battle. No police. Nothing. That doesn't make sense, I wrote back. Why would she agree to that? Because Daniel told her if she didn't, he'd kill all three of them. He had a gun. He showed it to her. She believed him. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type. So she was just going to abandon her son? She thought she was saving him. She thought once she was gone, Daniel would calm down. She thought she could come back later, get clean, get Matthew back through the courts. She didn't know Daniel was planning to kill her. She didn't know he'd already decided she wasn't leaving alive. I felt sick. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know that Vanessa wasn't a monster. She was trapped. She was terrified. She made bad choices, horrible choices, but she wasn't planning to let Matthew die. She told me she'd called you. The day before she died. She left you a voicemail telling you to check on them. Did you ever get it? I pulled up my phone with shaking hands. Went to my voicemail. Scrolled back to 2 years ago. And there it was. A voicemail from an unknown number. Dated the day before I found Matthew. I'd never listened to it. I'd assumed it was spam. I pressed play. Vanessa's voice came through. Quiet. Scared. Margaret, it's Vanessa. Please don't delete this. I know you hate me. I know you think I'm a terrible mother. You're right. But please check on Matthew. Daniel isn't okay. I'm leaving tomorrow and I'm scared of what he'll do. I can't take Matthew with me. Daniel won't let me. But I need to know someone will make sure he's okay. Please. Please. I'm begging you. Check on him. The message ended. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at my phone, as my entire understanding of the past 2 years shattered. Vanessa had called me. She tried to protect Matthew in the only way she thought she could. And I'd ignored it. I'd assumed it was spam. I'd almost let Matthew die because I didn't listen to a voicemail. I called Detective Morrison immediately. Played her the message. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Mrs. Carter, she said finally. This doesn't change Daniel's culpability. He still hid Matthew. He still abused him. He still killed Vanessa. But she tried, I whispered. She tried to save him. She did. But she also put him in danger by getting involved with drugs and Robert in the first place. Both things can be true. Both things can be true. Vanessa wasn't just a monster. She wasn't just a victim. She was a complicated, flawed, addicted person who made terrible choices and then, at the very end, tried to do one right thing. And I'd almost missed it. I never responded to that Facebook message. I don't know if the person was really Vanessa's friend or just someone who'd read about the case and wanted to stir up trouble. But the voicemail was real. Vanessa's voice was real. Her fear was real. I've never told Matthew about it. What would I say? Your mother wasn't completely evil, just mostly. He's 6. He doesn't need that burden. Maybe someday, when he's older, I'll tell him. I'll let him decide what to do with that information. But it changed something in me. Made me realize that the stories we tell about people, about victims, about villains, About monsters, they're never complete. There's always something we don't know. Always some piece of the puzzle we're missing. It doesn't excuse anything. Vanessa still chose drugs over her son. She still planned to leave him. But she also tried, in her own broken way, to make sure someone would find him. I think about that voicemail a lot. About how different things might have been if I'd listened to it immediately. If I'd gone to the house a day earlier. Would Vanessa still be alive? Would Daniel not be in prison for murder? Would Matthew have been spared those 3 days under the bed? Or would it have been worse? Would Daniel have killed all of us? I'll never know. What I do know is this: I can't change the past. I can only keep moving forward. Keep saving the children I can save. Keep telling the story that needs to be told. Yesterday, Matthew came home from school with a project. They'd been learning about heroes. He'd made a poster with pictures of firefighters, doctors, police officers. And in the center, he'd drawn a picture of me. Under it, in his careful 6-year-old handwriting, he'd written, "My mom is a hero because she found me when I was lost." I cried. Of course I cried. But they were different tears this time. Not tears of grief or trauma or pain. Tears of gratitude. Of purpose. Of knowing that despite everything, despite the drugs and the abuse and the murder and the nightmares, we'd made it through. We're still here. We're still fighting. We're still saving others. Tonight, I'm speaking at a conference for social workers. 500 people. The biggest audience I've ever had. I'm terrified. But I'm ready. I'm going to tell them everything. The silence. The drive. The fingers under the bed. Matthew's hollow eyes. The 3 days of horror. The investigation. The trials. The 20 children we've saved since then. And I'm going to tell them about the voicemail. About how Vanessa wasn't just a monster. About how people are complicated and broken, and sometimes they try to do the right thing even when they've done so many wrong things. I'm going to tell them that we have to look deeper. Listen harder. Check on the children even when we're not sure. Even when we're scared. Even when it's complicated. Because somewhere right now, there's a child hiding. Under a bed. In a closet. Behind a locked door. Waiting for someone to find them. Someone to save them. Someone to prove that they matter. And maybe, just maybe, someone in that audience of 500 will hear my story and think of a child they're worried about. A neighbor's kid who's too quiet. A student with suspicious bruises. A grandson they haven't heard from in too long. Maybe they'll make the call. Do the check. Save the child. That's why I keep doing this. Why I keep ripping open the wound. Why I keep reliving the worst day of my life over and over again. Because every time I tell the story, I save Matthew again. And maybe I save another child too. Matthew is in his room right now, doing homework. Basic addition. Writing practice. Normal 6-year-old stuff. In an hour, I'll call him down for dinner. We'll eat together. Talk about his day. Maybe watch a movie afterward. A normal evening. A peaceful evening. The kind of evening he never had in that house with Daniel and Vanessa. The kind of evening he almost never got to have at all. But he's here. He's safe. He's mine. And tomorrow, I'll wake up and do it all over again. Make breakfast. Take him to school. Go to work. Come home. Make dinner. Help with homework. Read bedtime stories. And once a week, sometimes more, I'll stand in front of strangers and tell them about the day I found my grandson under a bed, dying, terrified, abandoned. I'll tell them because it matters. Because he matters. Because all the children like him matter. I'll tell them because silence protects abusers. Because looking away enables horror. Because the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. I did something. I checked. I looked. I saved him. And now I'm asking you to do the same. If you're worried about a child, any child, don't wait. Don't second-guess yourself. Don't worry about being wrong or causing problems or ruining relationships. Call someone. Make the check. Look under the bed. Because somewhere, right now, there's a Matthew waiting. Hoping. Praying that someone will care enough to find them. Be that person. Please. Be the person who looks, who acts, who saves. Don't let another child spend 3 days under a bed, slowly dying, convinced that nobody's coming. Nobody's coming unless you go. So go. Check. Save them. Before it's too late. Before you get a call like the one I got, telling you they found the child but they were too late. The one I've gotten twice now. From people who waited too long. Who doubted themselves. Who thought surely someone else would check. I think about those 2 children every single day. The ones who weren't as lucky as Matthew. The ones who didn't get a second chance. Their names were Lily and Jacob. 4 and 7. Found 3 days too late. Their grandmother had been worried but convinced herself she was overreacting. She calls me sometimes. Late at night. When the guilt is eating her alive. I tell her it wasn't her fault. That she didn't know. That their parents are responsible. But we both know the truth. She could have saved them. If she'd just checked 1 day earlier. I don't tell you this to be cruel. I tell you because it's real. Because it happens. Because right now, today, there are children dying while people who love them convince themselves that surely everything is fine. It's not fine. And you know it's not fine. That's why you're worried. That's why you can't sleep at night. That's why you're reading this, looking for permission to act. Here's your permission, Gio. Now. Check on that child. Don't wait for the perfect time. Don't wait for more evidence. Don't wait until you're certain. By the time you're certain, it might be too late. Matthew was hours away from death when I found him. Hours. If I'd waited until the next day to drive up there, I would have found a corpse instead of a child. That's how close we came. That's how thin the line was between the story I'm telling you now and the story about the grandmother who lost her grandson because she hesitated. So please. If you're worried. If something feels wrong. If your instincts are screaming at you to check. Listen to them. Trust them. Act on them. Call Child Protective Services. Call the police. Go to the house yourself if you have to. Do whatever it takes. Because that child, the one you're worried about right now, they're depending on you. They might not know it. They might not be able to ask for help. But they need you. They need you to be brave when they can't be. They need you to speak when they've been silenced. They need you to look when everyone else is looking away. Be their hero. Be their Margaret. Be the person who saves them. And afterward, when they're safe and healing and building the life they deserve, you'll know. You'll know you did the right thing. Even if it was hard. Even if it destroyed relationships. Even if people called you paranoid or meddling or crazy. You'll know you saved a life. And that's worth everything. Matthew just called down the stairs. Mom. I'm hungry. When's dinner? I smiled. A real smile. 10 minutes, baby. Wash your hands. Okay. I heard him run to the bathroom. Heard the water running. Heard him singing to himself. A normal, happy, alive child. Because 2 years ago, I didn't wait. I didn't second guess. I didn't talk myself out of it. I went. I checked. I looked under the bed. And I found him. What would you do in this situation? What would you do if your instincts told you something was wrong? Would you check? Would you make the call? Would you save the child? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the children in your life, hit that like button and subscribe. Because next week, I'm sharing another story. Another family. Another rescue. And you won't want to miss it.